to Woke Nation um, for the end of January. It's the 20th um, on a late Sunday night. So, here we are back with a familiar topic, the media here in America, and its consistent downward spiral. There's a couple stories on both sides, the right and the left, that have kind of been bouncing around the social media sphere and also on cable news, and they've been getting a lot of traction on both sides, and they both kind of unequivocally shame the media from just about every angle you can possibly look at it. The first story that I'm going to go over is it has to do with the Mueller investigation. If you haven't been living under a rock lately, you know that BuzzFeed recently released a bombshell story, uh, basically stating in flat, very direct, um, very direct. It was they didn't state it as a question. In other words, it was a flat statement of fact that Michael Cohen had been directly directed by President Trump to lie about the building, I believe, of the Trump Tower in Moscow. Uh, d- this pertained to Michael Cohen's, I believe, congressional testimony. He has acknowledged that he lied during that testimony, and that's part of the reason why he'll be serving, I believe, 3 years in federal prison. He's already been sentenced, as most of you probably know. But the BuzzFeed story puts out there, they claim to have two law enforcement officials who are close to the story, which the only way they could be close to the story is if they were basically in Mueller's camp. Uh, at least as far as I can think. If somebody else knows another way that they could be very closely attached to the facts surrounding this case, let me know. But beyond, I mean, Mueller is the one that has basically wide-ranging reach to investigate all aspects of Trump's potential interaction with Russia during his campaign. So you would think that if anybody had all the facts at their disposal and all the avenues towards getting those facts were solely open to them, it would be Mueller and his crowd, his probe, his people, his lawyers working underneath him, his team. You would think that, but BuzzFeed seems to dispute that idea, which to me is mind blowing. So what happened was BuzzFeed put this story out a couple days ago, basically stating, as a matter of fact, that these two officials, these two law enforcement agencies, had contacted BuzzFeed reporters and said that they had that they had seen the documents that proved that Cohen had been directed by Trump to lie to Congress. And I think there was some back and forth, some discrepancies with that assertion that they had seen the documents. If you listen to the interview on CNN, I think his name's Leopold, I think, from BuzzFeed. Yeah, the one guy, he was being interviewed on CNN, and they're asking him had they seen the documents that prove all this, and at one point he kind of said yes, and then I believe the other member of the BuzzFeed editorial staff said no. So they kind of went back, they kind of said yes and no at the same time over whether they had actually seen proof and documents asserting that Trump had directed Cohen. So it's murky as to whether they had actually seen anything. The probability that they had physically seen any of these documents, I think, is very minimal. If they had, they would have said it in the article. Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you back up your claims as to the umpteenth degree? I would. If I was putting something out like that, and I knew my reputation and everything else would hinge upon an article with that much punch to it, you can bet your high dollar that if I had seen those documents, I would put that in the article that I had seen them. It just strikes me as a little odd that if they had seen proof themselves, that they wouldn't say it. They wouldn't mention it at all until a CNN interview later on after Mueller's camp came out and made their statement discrediting the story. So that's what happened. BuzzFeed puts out this story. Now, what's also interesting about it is I was watching. It was either Tucker Carlson or there's a station I watch on TV called One American News, and Liz Wheeler has a show called The Tipping Point on there. It was on one of their shows. I can't remember which one, but when the story first broke, they brought on one of their reporters who is obvious, like any other reporter, has their contacts within the White House, and they brought on this reporter and they asked him, what seems to like what's the sense you're getting from the White House? How are they reacting to this story? Because you would think that there would be a high degree of alarm if there was any kind of potential for truth for the with the BuzzFeed story. If there was any potential for truth with it, that the White House would be nervous, would be going into, high state of alert to as far as damage control is concerned. But the reporter said there was absolutely none of that. The sources he spoke to within the White House were well aware of this story before it even came out, and had absolutely showed no concern over it. They didn't say much. From what I remember, they didn't say much, according to this source, this reporter. I wish I had recorded that so I could just actually play it for the podcast here, but I didn't realize this would develop into the story that it did. Otherwise, I would have. But yeah, that kind of like tipped me off a little bit that this may not be all it kind of seems to be. If the White House knew about it beforehand and just didn't care, you would think that if this was the big fatal blow that it was portended to be, that they would be going into damage control. You would think that. So that was kind of like one thing that kind of raised a little bit of a flag for me about the BuzzFeed story, that maybe it's not all it's cracked up to be. And then of course came Mueller's statement from Carr. I think his name's Peter Carr, and I have the story here. It's from it's from the Washington Post. It's titled, "In a Rare Move, Mueller's Office Denies BuzzFeed Report That Trump Told Cohen to Lie About Moscow Project." And I'll just read through some of it. This is the actual statement from Mueller. Let me see here. And it's from a man named Peter Carr, who is a spokesman for Mueller. And the actual statement reads, quote, "BuzzFeed's description of specific statements to the special counsel's office and characterization of documents and testimony obtained by this office regarding Michael Cohen's congressional testimony are not accurate," close quote, said Peter Carr, a spokesman for Mueller. The Washington Post article goes on to say that this statement was remarkable on several levels. First, the special counsel's office speaks exceedingly rarely, and second, the statement seemed to drive a stake through a sensational allegation that Democratic lawmakers suggested earlier in the day could spell the end of the Trump presidency. Which is true. It's in typical fashion. As soon as BuzzFeed put this story out, every member of Congress, every Democrat member of Congress jumped on it immediately, saying, talking about impeachment and that this was the end of Trump's presidency, which was another thing to me. Once I started hearing that there's probably not much truth to this. I've been bitterly cynical about the whole Mueller probe from the very beginning, And so whenever I see sensationalized headlines like this and the Democrats reacting in hysterical fashion to them, I usually um, take the approach of sitting back and waiting rather than assuming any kind of truth to it, attaching any kind of truth to it. It just usually turns out to not be all it's cracked up to be, whatever. Um, so the statement was remarkable on several levels. As earth-shaking as the claims in the story were, no other media organizations were able to match them. And what's, I don't think, mentioned in the Washington Post article, and I saw this on Twitter from a number of different sources, that this story from BuzzFeed was actually kicked around different news organizations, and none of them wanted to touch it because they didn't feel like there was any real proof to it. Ronan Farrow, I believe, had gotten a hold of the story at one point, and he turned it down because he felt like it couldn't be corroborated, and he felt like the evidence was shaky at best. He didn't, and if Ronan Farrow's not touching it after all after how he put his name out there and his reputation on the line during the Brett Kavanaugh scandal, um, I think it was him that actually agreed to publish Michael Avenatti's uh, allegations of gang rape with Julie Swetnick, and that was Ronan Farrow putting that out. Now, I mean, if he would do that but not touch this, that kind of throws another little bit of a damper on it, from my perspective. Just a little, it makes it seem a little less true right there. If a number of high-ranking news publishers had gotten a hold of this and it had been kicked around and punted around like a tennis ball between them like a hot potato, and they just didn't want to touch it. But finally, BuzzFeed grabs a hold of it for dear life, thinking and believing that this could be the bombshell that legitimizes their whole scandalous operation, an operation which, by the way, is checkered with many, many stories that have been largely discredited. Most famously would be the fact that the BuzzFeed was the ones that broke the story on the Steele dossier with the whole story of Trump's lewd sexual misconduct. I don't want to say misconduct because of the way what the word means today, but that Trump was engaged in pretty perverse sex acts with prostitutes over in foreign countries in hotel rooms, things that involved like golden showers and urination, that kind of stuff. None of which was proven, which was known to be salacious and very highly disputed with some of the language that I heard kicked around with these media organizations, other ones, when describing it after it was published, when they were describing why they didn't want to touch it. But BuzzFeed again, jumped on it and put this out there immediately, wanting to believe that it's true, wanting the attention, wanting the honor and the praise, and to be the ones that produced the golden egg, the golden story that destroyed Trump, which all of this goes back to the fact that whether things are true or not, they're going to just cling to them like a drowning man because they want to see Trump go down. Um, it's one of the things that has been most shocking to me is after Mueller released this statement, uh, there are so many people, including the BuzzFeed editors, that are saying well, this isn't an actual denial of our story. It's not a refutation. They're not refuting our story, really. They're just saying that there's certain parts of it that are inaccurate. They're not being very specific, so what exactly are they saying isn't true? I look at it like this. If you read Mueller's statement, it's true. There is nothing that he's saying very specifically in it. It is a blanket statement, and it's a blanket statement because they are saying that the entire BuzzFeed story is inaccurate, and the entire what they're presenting as fact is inaccurate. It's a blanket statement. It is not specific intentionally because They are trying to put out a blanket statement on the whole BuzzFeed story, not just parts of it. If there were only parts of it that were inaccurate, they would have said that. Mueller and his team are not stupid. They know that if they put out a blanket statement that can easily be seen to discredit not specific parts of the BuzzFeed story, but a blanket statement that encapsulates the entire story, then that's all they need to do. It shoots down the entire thing. If they got into specifics, then you could argue specifics with them, which is what they're avoiding. They're avoiding it by putting out a statement that blankets the entire story as inaccurate and false. And then this quibbling that some of these journalists are doing on CNN and the BuzzFeed editors over the word inaccurate. That doesn't necessarily mean false. Okay, remove your head from your arse, okay? And actually drop your bias for once in your freaking life. Stop looking at everything through the lens of Orange Man bad. Put aside your hatred of Trump for 1 second and just read the statement. If Trump was not a part of this story at all, and somebody put out a statement like that from a government agency, um, uh, on a story, on a high-profile story that had nothing to do with Trump, nobody would be quibbling over the language used. People would all be admitting the obvious, which is that Mueller's team is discrediting the story and saying the story on the whole is inaccurate. It's obvious to anyone with half a brain. The only people that are disputing this are people that just don't want to admit that, the arrogance of it is absolutely shocking. When I was listening to the BuzzFeed interview on CNN, that they actually, in a way, indirectly are challenging Mueller over what he knows in his investigation. That would be like me writing a book that nobody but maybe 2 or 3 of my closest friends have seen. And then somebody who doesn't know me, is not involved in the writing of the book, maybe seeing half a page of it, and then writing an entire article on the book telling me what it's about, what I mean by the writing of it, um, and actually telling me all about my book. And then when I come out and say, no, none of that's true, them telling me again, you don't know what you're talking about. That's literally what's going on here. Not literally, but that's basically what's happening. They're telling Mueller that he doesn't know what he has found out, and he's not aware of his own evidence, basically, of what he has with him in front of him as far as information goes. They're basically telling him he doesn't know what he's doing. That's essentially what they're doing. It's mind-blowing stuff. Just the sheer desperation to be right, because they have this idea in mind that even if Mueller comes out, and I think he will, when he eventually publishes his report, I think it's going to largely exonerate Trump as far as collusion and obstruction and campaign finance. I think by and large his report is going to just say that, I think at best it's going to show that there is some monetary corruption at worst within some of the key players in the Trump administration, which we already know through Cohen and Paul Manafort, and that there's some dishonest people in there, which we know already from Cohen and Paul Manafort. I don't think we're going to find out anything more. They haven't proven any kind of connection between WikiLeaks and the Trump administration, because they were trying to prove this chain of how do you put it, chain of information from Assange to Jerome Corsi to Roger Stone to Trump, and to prove, and they haven't been able to prove that. If anything, Jerome Corsi has refused to cooperate entirely, and he is now suing the Mueller investigation. Robert Mueller, I don't know if he's suing him personally, but he's suing them, whoever. He's suing the probe or the people involved in it that are orchestrating it for $350 million. So not only have they not proven that, but their key witnesses are not cooperating at all. And the word that I've heard recently, at least as recently as possible on Manafort, is that he wasn't cooperating, which is partially why he's going to jail for as long as he is. Because he lied, and on top of that, just wouldn't sing or compose either, as um, Alan Dershowitz likes to say. They're not only being having this pressure on them, and I'm talking about Mueller's not only putting pressure on people like Corsi and Stone and Manafort and Cohen to sing, but also to compose, to make up, to come up with what they think Mueller wants to hear. But anyway, I'm getting a little beyond the actual BuzzFeed story here, but yeah. So this is a huge blow to the mainstream media's credibility. There's no denying it. As I said before, and as I brought up in other podcasts, BuzzFeed is the media organization, the media outlet that released the Steele dossier, which has been largely discredited and was viewed as dubious at best even before they published it. And now this current story, Pulitzer Prize winning investigative journalists like Ronan Farrow wouldn't even touch this. So there's a lot of shame that has been spilled onto the media, the mainstream media. This has done them absolutely no favors whatsoever as far as their honesty, their reputation, with the vast majority of America. The only people, again, that do not see Mueller's statement as a total denial and a total, I don't, is refutation, that's not even a word, and don't see it as Mueller totally refuting the story. The only people that don't see that are people that are just so hell-bent on seeing Trump go down. That's it. I don't see how else you can see it. Now, if Mueller comes out with another statement saying, yeah, there was just this little bit that was inaccurate, but the rest of it's generally right, hey, then it's different. But most of us, I think, know that Mueller's not going to say anything else. That's the other thing about this, that Mueller's camp never puts out statements. They never speak out. They've been silent through almost the entire probe for these past almost, 2 years. They've released almost no statements whatsoever. They do not respond to inquiries from journalists or reporters or etc. And so for them to take this step, and the Washington Post made note of this in the article I was just reading, that within the DOJ, this is viewed as highly unusual for Mueller to take this step and put a statement out, and they view it in the sense that since it's so highly unusual for Mueller to do this, they, in their eyes, in the eyes of the DOJ right now, according to Washington Post at least, their sources within it, I suppose, which, who knows who to believe anymore these days. It wouldn't have been that long. Normally I would never read a Washington Post article, so what am I even doing quoting them? I don't know. It's so hard to trust anybody these days, and that's the point. But at least according to their sources within the DOJ, they're viewing this from the perspective that the very fact that Mueller would release a statement at all basically is saying that the entire BuzzFeed story is hogwash, just total bullcrap from beginning to end. So there's that too. It doesn't gel. It doesn't seem right. I think this is a huge black eye for the credibility of the mainstream media. A mainstream media, which, by the way, already has a black eye. So now they're just wandering around blind, which we already figured they were doing anyway. So, moving on from that, though, there is another story that's been careening around the echo chambers on Twitter. And this has to do with a video that was posted online on some Catholic high school kids who were wearing MAGA hats, and apparently they were at they were at the March for Life rally in Washington D.C. over the past weekend, and a video surfaced of I guess he was a Vietnamese uh, uh, Vietnam War veteran, but he was an Indian American Vietnamese Vietnam War veteran. And the video, at least that originally went viral, just showed this Native American war veteran standing in the midst of a group of high school students wearing MAGA hats while he was chanting and beating his drum in the face of one of the students who had a seemingly arrogant smile on his face, just staring at him, and the kids around him are kind of yelling and being, somewhat rowdy. Um, and so initially, when this video goes viral, there is, of course, a predictable backlash of outrage, outpouring of outrage from the liberal media and liberal pundits and talking heads on CNN, MSNBC, blah, 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 all condemning these kids as racists, all the narrative that was pushed immediately was that these kids sought out this guy to harass him, that he was minding his own business, just standing around doing a few chants in public, and they decided to go harass this guy because they're racists, they're white supremacists. Look at them, they're wearing MAGA hats. These are the most evil, filthy people on the face of the planet, and here's just further proof of it. So that was the initial narrative that was being pushed. Now, now that the furor has sort of died down just a little bit, and smart minds, saner minds have intervened, people have gone and done the wise thing, which was to put up the actual full video. And if you watch the entire video, well, there's many different clips out there. Some of them shown from different angles, so you get multiple perspectives on what actually went on. But if you watch it, there's even one, I guess, that's a 2-hour video out there, which I haven't seen the whole 2-hour thing. I don't think I could stand it. But basically, what was going on was that there was this group of high school, Catholic high school kids. Hold on, I'm going to pull up the article here. There's an article, a really good article on it from Reason Magazine, which is a libertarian magazine, and it says, the title of it is "The Media Wildly Mischaracterized That Video of Covington Catholic Students Confronting a Native American Veteran. Journalists who uncritically accepted Nathan Phillips," Nathan Phillips is the Native American veteran. Journalists who uncritically accepted Nathan Phillips' story got this completely wrong. I'll read some of it. So it says, partial video footage of students from a Catholic high school allegedly harassing a Native American veteran after the anti-abortion March for Life rally in Washington, D.C. on Saturday quickly went viral, provoking widespread condemnation of the kids on social media. Various media figures and Twitter users called for them to be doxxed, which is for their personal information to be spread out in the on social media, for them to be shamed and to be basically publicly harassed and abused, shamed or otherwise punished. And school administrators said they would consider expulsion. But the rest of the video, nearly 2 hours of additional footage showing what happened before and after the encounter, adds an important context that strongly contradicts the media's narrative. Far from engaging in racially motivated harassment, the group of mostly white, MAGA hat-wearing male teenagers remained relatively calm and restrained despite being subjected to incessant, racist, homophobic, and bigoted verbal abuse by members of the bizarre religious sect Black Hebrew Israelites who were lurking nearby. So if you watch the video, you will see before what's the guy's name? Forget it already. Before Nathan Phillips, the Native American veteran, even shows up with his little drum to beat um, obnoxiously in these kids' faces. Excuse me. Before he even shows up, there's a group of these black Islamic guys standing there in traditional garb, um, just basically hurling abuse at this group of Catholic kids wearing the MAGA hats. They call them the N word is used. I heard that on the video. I read it in the article and I heard it myself. Um, they call them faggots. There's a number of terms that they were hurling at these kids, and for the most part, the kids really didn't do a whole lot about it. I mean, they shouted back a little bit, perhaps. I didn't watch all 2 hours of the footage, but what I saw of it, the kids were pretty tame considering what was going on. And they certainly weren't using racist or homophobic terms like faggot. I didn't hear any of that from the kids. Um, let's see. Uh, Phillips put himself between the teens and the black nationalists, chanting and drumming as he marched straight into the middle of the group of young people. So this guy Phillips he intentionally inserted himself in front of these kids and into the middle of their group. They didn't seek him out, he sought them out. He, the mature adult, decided to put himself directly in the faces of these kids and to beat his drum obnoxiously right in the face of one of these kids who just stood there smiling at him. Now, some people have said the kid just smiled at him because he thought the music sounded good or something. No, I don't think so. That's not the impression I got. The impression I got was that the kid was just kind of smiling at him like, "Who's this idiot?" You know, which I mean, come on. And people are saying, "Oh, these Catholic kids were mocking his music and his chant." Of course they were. Yeah, I mean, that's what it. I don't know if it looked like that. I don't know. I didn't see them directly. Um, so I shouldn't say of course they were, but like I know if I was in that situation and I was already being called like a faggot and the N word and all this other stuff from these like crazy looking Muslim people across the square, and all we have been doing is just standing there at a pro life function. Um, well, the very fact that I'm at the March for Life would already kind of like put me on my guard because I know that's a confrontational setting just from the get go because people are going to be have animosity towards pro-lifers. If they're not pro-lifers themselves, they're going to be hurling abuse. I've been to these marches before. I know that people drive by and give you the finger and yell "F you" at you all the time. Um, so I would be on my guard from the get-go. And if somebody just walked into a group of me and my friends beating a drum in my face and chanting and, in his own way, being obviously confrontational, I would mock him too. I would. That doesn't make you a racist. It just means that's just how confrontations go. If somebody's going to insert themselves in front of you and be confrontational in that way towards you, how how do you expect high school kids to react? He's the adult there. He's the one that was acting irresponsible. He's the one that chose to walk into the middle of this group of kids and beat his drum like a freaking idiot in this kid's face and then get all shocked that the kid didn't just. What did he think the kid was going to do? Oh, thank you. Thank you for displaying your indigenous music. I was deeply touched by your culture. Please beat your drum in my face again. Come on now. Are we so dislodged from reality that we can't see that this is a grown man choosing to do something and basically choosing to instigate a group of high school kids? Like he's basically creating a situation that where a confrontation might boil over into actual physical violence potentially. I mean, the whole thing was just egged on from beginning to end from the black Hebrew Israelite group that was there, just hurling abuse at these kids, and then the Phillips character going into and beating his drum, and the kids. The whole thing is a charade. Again, another black eye. If they had three eyes, all three of them would be black now for the mainstream media. I mean, they'll never see again. That much is obvious. They've been beaten up so much in just one freaking week. They again, and they immediately pounced on it. Nobody wanted to see the entire video. Of course, it was conservatives that put the entire video up there, I'm sure. You don't even need to research that. I'm sure it was. I doubt very much the liberal media got on top of that. Like BuzzFeed, they just jump all over their already previously conceived beliefs, their assumptions, and just run with it. If you wear a MAGA hat, you're racist. So don't even bother with the rest of the video. These kids must be racist. It's just absolutely disgusting. And on a surface level, you can laugh it off and say this is stupid, and the media, are just not trustworthy. This is another reason not to believe them. If that were all there was to it, then we would all move on. But there's the big but that there are actually actual lives being affected here. All these Catholic high school kids who actually really didn't do much of anything wrong are now being doxxed, having abuse hurled at them from millions of people around the world online and probably in real life as well. I'm sure somebody somewhere has found their actual addresses and mailed plenty of death threats to them. That's just how these things would go. You can ask Tucker Carlson about that. Um, and now the school's investigating. People are calling for them to be expelled. So basically, their relative near future may be ruined over this. And who knows? Who knows? As our culture continues to grow hysterical over potential racism around every corner, who knows if this might begin to affect the potential that they would have to get into universities or actually get a job if now they're labeled an actual racist. If Yeah, I mean, who knows what kind of effect that might have on somebody going into the future as we get more and more hysterical over every incident being racist. Everything's racist now, and the consequences for this potential racism is just mounting by the day. So when you're getting called that, I mean, you really, it's not, it's on one hand, they've, I've said many times before, they've taken all meaning out of the word because they use it so much. And so on one hand, who cares when they call you that now? I don't care. I've been called that plenty of times on Twitter. It doesn't bother me none because I know I'm not, and I know they're just going to call anybody who they disagree with a racist. But there's the very real reality on the other side of that it's starting to have real world consequences for people. People are being shadow banned, and that's just the social media and the celebrity side of things. Even Kevin Hart wasn't allowed at the Oscars because of this kind of crap. Um, but for the little guy, he may, the normal average Joe Schmo, he gets called a racist and he gets fired from his job and he can't provide for his family. And if things continue down the path that they're going, maybe it'll come to the point one day where he gets fired from his job and the government refuses him uh, not workman's comp, unemployment, you know. Maybe he won't be able to get unemployment either. It may come to that if he's deemed I don't know what you know, it may come to that where the government even looks at him and says, well, why were you fired? For racism, essentially. Well, if you're a racist, we're not going to give you unemployment. It may come to even that too. So things are progressing very quickly and in a very dark, dark, dark route, down a dark hole. The famous saying goes, the path, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and I think that's just probably the most apt description of our country these days. Um, Finally, here, going on a little bit longer than I wanted to, but the final story that I wanted to get to has to do with but our first two stories were issues with reporting on the left. And I wanted to be fair because while I often criticize the liberal left, and I generally believe that they're in the wrong in almost every conceivable ideological argument and debate here in the country today. But that doesn't mean that they're they're the only ones that are responsible for all the hysteria and the fake news and the false narratives and the outrage culture that is destroying the like good journalism in America today. And on the right, we have those that are just as guilty of this as like BuzzFeed is. And one person that I take particular issue with and who I really have come to dislike intensely is Laura Loomer. Now, there was a period of time there when I was kind of on the fence about her because she did do some things that I thought, well, I mean, the girl's just straight up obnoxious. When she calls it when she loomers people, when she said, you got loomered, it means that she lays in wait for somebody to walk by and then jumps out at them with her cell phone and basically screeches questions into their faces. Um, she doesn't even pose the questions in a grammatically correct fashion. She just yells like words and talking points and key phrases, sound bites. Um, Basically, she yells clickbait in people's faces. The most outrageously posed, like she basically asks everybody the same question over and over. When did you stop beating your wife? You know, that famous uh, she asks them questions that there's just no right answer to. You know, is there a rock too heavy for God to lift? When did you stop beating your wife? Like questions like that. She just hurls at her opponent. Um, she never gives them a chance to really respond. She just keeps yelling the same inane question over and over and over at them. And she does it in a very off putting, obnoxious manner. She doesn't even try to follow like the rules or propriety in the establishments that she's in. She doesn't respect other people's space. Um, she doesn't respect security. She violates just about every ethical standard you can possibly think of when she does these interviews. Uh, the reason I was One of the reasons why I was kind of on the fence with her, because normally I would just dismiss her entirely, is because she is sometimes effective, and she was effective when she confronted Alyssa Milano on a stage. She came in there and demanded to know why Alyssa Milano was associating with the Women's March, um, which had Linda Sarsour and some other ladies on it who are openly anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish, racists, and like Louis Farrakhan, who's called Jews termites, etc. You know, he's a despicable human being, and so is Linda Sarsour. They should both just have ship anchors tied to their ankles and be dropped out into the middle of the Pacific Ocean, never to be seen or heard from again. They're a waste of life. But the Women's March was being run by these people. They were some of the leaders. Farrakhan was involved. Linda Sarsour was a big name involved. And I don't think Alyssa Milano really had paid too much. Maybe she didn't know, or she didn't pay attention, or she just hadn't heard, or she had brushed it off as just ugly rumors that were unfounded. But whatever the case may be, after Laura Loomer confronted her, Alyssa Milano did disassociate herself from that group because of their anti-Semitism. And you've seen the decline of the Women's March since then. And that a lot of it was started by Laura Loomer. It's undeniable. So she has had some positive effect, you know. She shook up Comey a little bit at his book tour when she asked him what he was going to do when he was indicted. He didn't know at the time that he was indicted, even. He found out the hard way through her, if I remember correctly, as she was led away by security. Um, so, I mean, that's kind of humorous to hear about, that she was the first person to inform Comey that he was about to be indicted. Excuse me. And even he didn't know it. And then, you know, the whole thing she did with Alyssa Milano. So I was kind of on the fence a little bit, but at the same time, she was just very off-putting, and she does things that I often accuse the left of just being like just rude and obnoxious and in your face, not respecting your space, like Maxine Waters, you know. And we complain that Maxine Waters is instigating violence and unrest and incivility by telling her supporters to get up in the faces of Republicans and conservatives. But yet Laura Loomer will criticize Maxine Waters for that. But when she went to interview Maxine Waters, she got up in Maxine Waters' face. She created a scene. She was uncivil. She was rude. She was in her face, in her personal space. It was just ugly and hypocritical the whole way through. Well, and then later on, Laura Loomer got banned from Twitter, unjustly, of course. But needless to say, she made a spectacle out of that by chaining herself to the front door of Twitter headquarters in New York City. Long story short, she's in the news again, even though she's banned off of most social media. She's in the news again because she went down to a Home Depot and picked up a couple illegal immigrants, convinced them to go with her because they don't speak any English, and she climbed the security wall around one of Nancy Pelosi's, I guess, mansions. I think in Malibu. I'd have to. I have the story here. Hold on. I think it was in Malibu. I'll just read it. This is from the Daily Caller. Right-wing activists stormed the security wall surrounding House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's California mansion and demanded access into the building on Monday. The group was led by Laura Loomer, an activist who has been at the center of many stunts, including interrupting congressional hearings and chaining herself to the doors of Twitter's New York offices. Laura was joined by a small group of alleged illegal immigrants from Guatemala. Laura and her accomplices carried a large banner with the faces of notable Americans who have been killed by illegal immigrant crime over recent years attached to its surface. The entire event was live streamed on Twitter. Um, there's a couple videos here of it. People just basically rolling their eyes. Let's see. Scrolling down. During one part of the video, Laura Loomer can be seen marching to the door of Pelosi's mansion. So she's definitely illegally trespassing and breaking onto her property. And she marches to the door of Pelosi's mansion, demanding she be let in to make a sandwich with the other illegal aliens. Laura found the door to be locked and complained that it was, quote, hypocritical of Pelosi to not have, quote, open doors and borders to her own property. Now, this is a point that many have made about about Pelosi and Schumer and Obama and the Clintons. Many have pointed out rightly that they claim walls to be immoral, yet they have plenty of them around their own houses. And now this is an obvious um, double standard with the left, but that does not mean you break into their property, Laura Loomer. What is wrong with you? All this does is make our side look stupid and crazy. It adds fuel to the fire um, for the left wing narrative that we are all just right wing nut jobs. This just throws gasoline all over that fire. Um, Besides the fact that never, never, never should we break the law. I mean, of what value is our side if we are going to lower ourselves and strip away all our values just so that we can win? How is that actually winning if we're going to compromise everything that separates us from the other side? I mean, we're supposed to be the side of law and order and rights and civility and Judeo-Christian values. And if we compromise all that just for the sake of winning, then have we really won it all? And I've listened to Laura in some of her interviews um, flat out say that she does not care about people that accuse her of hypocritically using the same tactics that the left uses. And she readily admits that she will use the same tactics the Antifa does when they surrounded Tucker Carlson's house and tried to bang his door down while his wife hid in the pantry, in the kitchen pantry. She's said that she would do the very same thing, basically. This is not somebody that you want on your side at all. Um, while in the past I was on the fence about her, this whole thing with Pelosi breaking onto Nancy Pelosi's property, trying to enter her house, breaking and entering, is what it would have been. How she did not end up in prison, I don't know. But this whole thing is just a shameful farce of an event. It proved absolutely nothing. Nobody has to break onto Nancy Pelosi's property to still see the hypocrisy behind Nancy Pelosi saying that walls are immoral. We know it's a disingenuous, hypocritical statement. You don't have to break onto her property to prove it. If you have half a working brain, you know it is. Okay? You're just making yourself look stupid and making our side look entirely crazy by doing this. So, long story short, this was a terrible, terrible week for both the right and the left as far as their journalism, because Laura Loomer is somehow considered still a journalist. She's more of just a nutcase, but she still has this title of journalist attached to her name. Um, which I think we can throw that out now. She's not a journalist. She's just a nutcase activist. And anyone who wants to have any sort of legitimacy attached to their name and actually not be a hypocrite should have nothing to do with her. So, yeah, as far as the week goes, BuzzFeed took another black eye. Um, the left proved once again how rabid it is in their obsession to continue the narrative that all MAGA followers are white racists. And Trump, they continued their rabid obsession with Orange Man bad, Orange Man bad, Orange Man bad. And finally, Laura Loomer just proving um, once and for all that there are bad eggs on each and every side. All right. Well, that's the episode for this week. Tune in again next week. We'll have another good one for you. In the meantime, subscribe to Woke Nation on iTunes, download the Podbean app, subscribe on YouTube, and please leave a review on iTunes because it helps the show to actually get viewed more on the platform. If you don't review it, less and less people actually see it. So the more reviews, the more people see it. In the meantime, good night and God be with you.